Yeah, there's certainly a lot to unpack with all of this. Police tonight telling us Joseph was somehow connected to Christine Banfield, the woman who lived here and was found brutally stabbed to death initially. Police had said Christine's husband had told them that he shot Ryan, but tonight a new twist in the case as the family's au pair is now charged with Ryan's murder.
Everybody, rock your body right.
She thought it was just another morning. Her daughter had been dressed for a trip to the zoo. Her husband had already left for work. And the young woman living in their home, someone she trusted like family, said everything was fine. 30 minutes later, Christine Banfield was bleeding out in her own bed. And a strange man was dead on the floor beside her. No one broke into the house. No one called for help in time. But somehow, a mother and a stranger both ended up dead, while the two people closest to her stood there unharmed. So the question isn't what happened inside that quiet Virginia home. The real question is, how long had it been happening before anyone heard a scream? It was just after 7:30 a.m. on a Friday in one of the safest neighborhoods in Herndon, Virginia. Inside the Banfield home, a 4-year-old girl had just been dressed by her nanny for what she was told would be a special trip to the zoo. But before the day could begin, something went terribly wrong upstairs. The screams came first, then a series of panicked 911 calls that dropped almost as quickly as they were made. By the time police arrived, they walked into a scene that felt both violent and staged. In the master bedroom, 37-year-old Christine Banfield, a pediatric nurse, wife, and mother, lay dying from stab wounds. Beside her, a man she'd never been known to associate with, Joseph Ryan. He was dead from a gunshot wound to the chest. Her husband, Brendan Banfield, a federal law enforcement officer, was at the scene, visibly shaken. So was their live-in nanny, Juliana. But it didn't take long for first responders to notice something was off. There were too many weapons, and not enough answers. At first, the story seemed clear. An intruder broke in, tried to harm Christine, and the husband shot him. But then, the inconsistencies started stacking up. No signs of forced entry. 2 guns. A knife. And then, a child's voice.
Hey, I'm Officer Bell. Nice to meet you. Do you want to go outside with us?
We need to go outside, okay?
Let's go.
Come here. Come here.
One that had been in the house the entire time started telling a different version of events. A version that investigators would find harder and harder to ignore. Before long, the story shifted from a botched home invasion to a twisted betrayal wrapped in lust, lies, and a plot worthy of fiction. Only this time, the blood was real. And so was the heartbreak. This is the case of Christine Banfield, a woman who thought she was building a life with a man she trusted, until that life was shattered in a single morning, inside the walls of her own home. And the question that still haunts everyone who hears it: why was a complete stranger lying dead next to her, while the people she lived with walked away? From the outside, Christine and Brendan Banfield had the kind of life most people would admire. A $1 million home on a peaceful cul-de-sac in Herndon, Virginia. 2 stable careers. A healthy, beautiful daughter. Social media posts painted the picture of a happy, hard-working couple. Gym selfies, beach vacations, and little moments with their child that made it all look effortless. Christine was a pediatric nurse, the kind who took 16-hour night shifts and still made time to be a hands-on mother. Her posts showed a woman proud of her work, and even prouder of her role as a mom. Brendan, by contrast, kept a lower profile online. As a criminal investigator for the IRS, his job involved tax fraud and financial crimes. Not exactly the stuff of Instagram stories. But to friends and colleagues, he was the quiet, analytical type. Loyal, dependable, protective. They'd met young, back in college, dated for years. Married in 2010. Their daughter was born in 2018, 5 years before Christine's death. And like many working parents in the D.C. metro area, they eventually turned to the au pair system for help. In 2019, a Brazilian caregiver named Amanda joined the Banfield household through a cultural exchange program. For 2 years, Amanda was like family. Her social media filled with pictures of birthdays, school drop-offs, and family dinners.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Next, I know your ABC. Next time, won't you sing with me?
When Amanda's time ended in 2021, the Banfields searched for someone similar. That's how Juliana Perez Magalhaes came into the picture. Juliana was young, just 23, and also from Brazil. She was a registered nurse back home, but came to the U.S. as an au pair to study, explore, and support herself. The fit seemed perfect. She lived in the home, helped care for their daughter, and blended into the household seamlessly. At least, that's how it looked on the surface. No one, not friends, not neighbors, not even Christine, seemed to realize that just beneath the surface of this picture-perfect family was a slow-moving fracture. One that had already begun to splinter long before that February morning. One that involved trust being manipulated, boundaries being erased, and a man quietly choosing a new future, at the expense of the one he'd already built. And somewhere in the middle of it all was a child, watching, listening, and remembering more than anyone knew. February 24th, 2023 started like any other Friday in the Banfield home. Or at least, that's what someone wanted it to look like. Juliana woke the Banfields' 4-year-old daughter early that morning, got her dressed, told her they were going to the zoo. It was a school day, but the child didn't question it. She was excited, and the au pair, the one she saw almost every day, told her it would be their special outing. She even reminded her to stay quiet so she wouldn't wake Mommy. It felt innocent, maybe even sweet, but it wasn't. By 7:50 a.m., a strange 911 call came in, placed from Juliana's phone. It lasted just 8 seconds and ended abruptly. In the background, a man could be heard groaning in pain. 13 minutes later, another call came. This time, Juliana told dispatch that a friend had been hurt. Seconds into the conversation, Brendan grabbed the phone and took over. He said he had shot a man, someone who had stabbed his wife. The timeline immediately raised questions. The gap between calls, the vagueness, the casual tone. Police arrived within minutes, and the scene was horrifying, but also suspicious.
Hey, Paul. Or Jose. You got that.
Christine Banfield was still clinging to life, but barely. She had been stabbed multiple times. Beside her was a man named Joseph Ryan. He was already dead from a gunshot wound to the chest. There were 2 weapons at the scene, a knife and a firearm. The police found no signs of forced entry, and while both Brendan and Juliana appeared frantic, neither showed any injuries that aligned with a life-or-death struggle. Then came the silence. Brendan, though visibly distraught, refused to talk to police after his initial statement. Juliana, on the other hand, was cooperative at first. She gave a written account. She claimed that Joseph Ryan was an intruder, that she and the child had arrived and witnessed him inside the house, and that Brendan shot him in self-defense. But it didn't add up. Juliana was supposed to live in the home. So where had she come from that morning? Why was the child told they were going to the zoo? And why did Joseph Ryan, a complete stranger to the family, have no defensive wounds? As investigators began to pull at the threads, one by one, The version of events that Brendan and Juliana offered started to unravel, and the biggest clue wouldn't come from a detective, but from the smallest witness in the house. The 4-year-old had been there the entire time, in the basement, listening. At first, the little girl didn't say much. After all, she was only 4 years old, and her mother had just died. But as child forensic interviewers sat with her at the police station later that day, gently asking questions in a controlled setting, the words started to come out. She said Juliana had woken her that morning, helped her get dressed, and told her to be quiet so Mommy wouldn't wake up. She said they were going to the zoo, and she believed it. But instead of heading out for a day of animals and snacks, Juliana led her to the basement. That's where she waited, while something horrific happened upstairs. She didn't see the stabbing. She didn't witness the shooting, but she remembered the sounds, the shouting, the footsteps, the loud noise, a gunshot, that didn't make sense to a child, but was unmistakable to the adults listening. Her statements were fragile but revealing, and more importantly, they contradicted the story both Brendan and Juliana had given. Under Virginia law, statements from children under 13 are rarely admissible in court unless certain exceptions are met. But prosecutors fought hard to have her account included, calling it a crucial piece of the puzzle. The judge agreed to consider it, because what she said pointed to planning, deception, and staging. She hadn't just been forgotten during a chaotic crime. She had been intentionally included in it. Prosecutors would later argue that Brendan and Juliana wanted her in the house that day, that her presence would help support their story, that she could be used as emotional proof that they had no choice but to defend themselves against an attacker. After all, who would put their child at risk during a premeditated crime? But this wasn't just about logistics. It was about betrayal. The kind a child doesn't even have the words for yet. Her mother was dead. Her father was lying. And the woman who had helped tuck her in at night might have helped plan the murder. Joseph Ryan was a 38-year-old man from Springfield, Virginia, a contractor, a quiet guy, single, known to a few close friends, but not connected to the Banfields in any way anyone could explain. So, how did he end up dead inside their bedroom, next to a bleeding woman he'd never met? The story the police were first told was simple.
Just want to tell me quickly what happened.
I don't really know what happened. Everything happened too fast. I was on his car, called her to see what's going on because it's early in the morning, like, the people was here. And then he was straight to voicemail. I called Brendan, it's her husband. He's up there. I called him. I see his French car, but I don't know who is that. Can you please come here? I'm scared.
Joseph had broken into the home. He had a knife. He attacked Christine. Brendan shot him to protect his wife, but the evidence wouldn't cooperate. Investigators found Joseph's online footprint, and that's when things started to shift. He'd been active on a fetish site called FetLife, a platform for adults exploring alternative sexual interests. Weeks before the murders, Joseph had been messaging with a woman who claimed to be Christine Banfield. The messages were detailed. She talked about fantasies involving submission, knife play, and being overpowered. She asked him to bring a knife, cuffs, belts. She even sent him a photo of herself, a real photo of Christine, lifted from her social media. But it wasn't Christine who had sent those messages. Prosecutors later uncovered what they believed was a fake account, made by Brendan. He used his wife's images, wrote in her voice, and lured Joseph Ryan to the house under the pretense of a consensual sexual encounter. Joseph had no way of knowing he was walking into a trap. Even more disturbing, investigators found that Brendan and Juliana had visited a gun range together just weeks before the killing. A month after that visit, Brendan returned alone to purchase a Glock, the same weapon Juliana would later use to shoot Joseph. Then came the phones. Both Brendan and Juliana had replaced their devices just 4 days before the murder. Not damaged, not lost, just replaced. Prosecutors said it was an obvious move to erase communications, photos, or anything that could point to what they were planning. The more investigators dug, the clearer it became. Joseph wasn't an attacker. He was bait. He walked into that house expecting a private, if unusual, encounter. But instead, he became part of a deadly performance. One where he played the villain, without even knowing the script. Forensic techs noted that Christine's body wasn't positioned naturally. Her injuries told one story: multiple stab wounds, sharp trauma to the chest. But the way she lay didn't match what someone would expect in the chaos of a surprise attack. Joseph's body was suspicious too. He'd been shot in the chest, but his arms were crossed and smeared with blood, in patterns that didn't align with active combat. Someone had moved them, and someone had wiped parts of the scene. Blood spatter analysts determined that objects had been shifted after the fatal wounds were inflicted. The scene had been staged, they said. Not in a panic, but with deliberate intent. Photos taken weeks later would show even more unsettling changes. Juliana's old bedroom had been cleared out, and her belongings, makeup, clothing, even lingerie, were now in Brendan's room. Shared drawers, a framed photo of the two of them on the bedside table. Every trace of Christine had been removed. Even family pictures that once showed Christine, Brendan, and their daughter were replaced with ones of Juliana, as if the swap had been in the works long before the blood was cleaned up. Then came the legal flags. Juliana applied for a new passport, despite her original one being held by authorities. Her attorneys claimed it was just for identification purposes. Prosecutors weren't buying it. Combined with the cleared bedroom and the replaced photos, it looked like someone was preparing for a different life, one that didn't include Christine. Brendan, by then, had stopped talking. In his court appearance, he invoked the fifth. No explanations, no denial, just silence. But silence couldn't erase the patterns that were starting to emerge. 2 months before the killing, he had booked a trip to Brazil, Juliana's home country. Days before his arrest, they were planning to leave. And for the prosecutors building a case, the bedroom wasn't just a crime scene. It was a declaration that Christine had already been erased long before she was killed. To the outside world, Brendan Banfield was a calm, responsible federal agent, a family man with a quiet demeanor and a steady job at the IRS. But behind closed doors, investigators were uncovering a man who had been preparing for an entirely different life, one that didn't include his wife. According to court testimony, Brendan's relationship with Juliana began sometime in August 2022, nearly a year after she joined the household as an au pair. At the time, Juliana still had a long-distance boyfriend back in Brazil. But her bond with Brendan deepened quickly and quietly. No fights, no confrontations, no visible cracks in the family facade. Just small, unnoticed shifts that would later mean everything. They started spending more time together outside the house. 1 month before the murder, they traveled together to New York. Not for work, for a show. They shared a hotel, made memories, laughed, all while Christine was back home with their daughter. At trial, prosecutors alleged that by late 2022, Brendan had made a decision. He didn't want a divorce. He didn't want to lose custody. He didn't want to split assets, or share visitation, or live under a custody order. He wanted a clean slate. And that's when the planning began. Brendan created a fake profile online using Christine's photos. He posed as his wife and reached out to Joseph Ryan on a fetish website. He initiated conversations, encouraged Joseph to bring specific items, and set up a rendezvous at their home, all under the pretense of consensual adult play. But this wasn't just about setting up Joseph. It was about building the perfect cover. Because if Joseph was found dead at the scene, with a knife in his bag and explicit messages on record, it would look like Christine had invited him. And Brendan, he'd be the grieving husband who arrived just in time to protect his wife and child from a man she'd lured in herself. Only one thing went wrong. Christine never got the chance to act confused, or ashamed, or afraid. She never even got to speak. Brendan had turned off her phone before leaving that morning, tucked it away in a kitchen drawer. That way, no one could reach her, not even Joseph, because she wasn't meant to participate in this story. She was meant to be the ending of it. The first 911 call lasted 8 seconds. In the background, Joseph Ryan could be heard groaning, still alive. And then it cut out. For the next 13 minutes, there was silence. No follow-up call, no attempt to explain. No panic in Juliana's voice when she finally dialed back. Just a vague report that a friend had been hurt. Why the delay? Prosecutors believe those 13 minutes were used for something cold and calculated. Staging. That's when Brendan and Juliana moved bodies, wiped down surfaces, and positioned Christine and Joseph to fit a narrative. One that would make Joseph look like the aggressor, and Brendan and Juliana the rescuers. But something didn't go according to plan. Joseph Ryan was still alive after Brendan shot him, wounded but breathing. That wasn't part of the script, and Brendan, in that moment, didn't act like a man trying to save anyone. According to first responders,
Hey, Paul. Or Jose. You got that. You got that. I mean, watch out, man.
There's a dog back there.
So somebody's outside.
Someone's outside in the back?
In the back?
There's a dog in the back there.
Anyone else outside? Who else is outside?
Nobody outside.
Anyone over here?
he barely looked at Christine. He wasn't asking how she was doing. He kept repeating one question. Is he still alive? It was a chilling detail, and one that told investigators what Brendan feared most. If Joseph lived, he could talk, and that couldn't happen. So Juliana, the same woman who'd been instructed to bring the backup firearm from the bathroom, made a choice. She didn't hand the gun to Brendan. She pulled the trigger herself. One shot, to the chest. The autopsy would later confirm it. Her bullet was the fatal one. Juliana later told police she acted in panic, trying to protect Brendan and the child.
Went inside. The guy, I don't know who it is, he was spanking her. I was just here.
Were you here when it happened, or did you walk up in there and
No,
that's how they were?
yeah, he went upstairs first, and then I went to see what is going on.
That she only fired because Joseph was still a threat. But by the time she admitted it, her story had already changed, multiple times. And even worse, the physical evidence kept contradicting her claims. Blood patterns showed that Joseph's body had been dragged and repositioned. His arms were crossed, unnaturally smeared with blood that had pooled elsewhere first. Christine's torn pajamas, the ones Joseph had allegedly cut during their planned encounter, were cleanly sliced, but folded near the bed. Not on her, not in motion, details, tiny ones, but damning. By the end of the forensic report, it was clear this wasn't a crime of passion, it was a performance. And the final act was a kill shot to silence the only outsider in the room. For months after the murders, Brendan and Juliana remained a united front, quiet, coordinated, and under suspicion. Brendan said little. Juliana stuck to her self-defense claim. And the public? Still torn. Some believed Juliana had saved a life. Others believed she helped take two. But everything changed on October 19th, 2023, when Juliana was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The evidence had shifted. Forensics proved it was her bullet that killed Joseph. The story about protecting Christine no longer made sense, and investigators had started piecing together a timeline that painted her not as a witness, but as a participant. The arrest blindsided Juliana, but it also triggered something else: cooperation. By the end of that month, Juliana had flipped. She sat down with prosecutors, looked them in the eye, and gave them what they'd been chasing since day one: a full confession. She admitted that Brendan Banfield, the father, the federal agent, the man she once loved, had masterminded the plot. She confessed that he'd asked her to speak with Joseph Ryan on Telegram, posing as Christine. That she'd been scared, hesitant, but followed through because she felt trapped under his control. She told them about the morning of the murder, how Brendan told her to handle Joseph's arrival, to lie to the daughter about a zoo trip, to wait for him. How he'd shut off Christine's phone before leaving, ensuring she couldn't call for help. How they entered the house through the basement, left the child downstairs, and walked into the bedroom, guns ready. She described the moment Brendan yelled, "Police!" before shooting Joseph in the head, and how, moments later, he stabbed his own wife. Her account was chilling, not just for what it revealed, but for what it meant. Brendan never intended to save Christine. She was never part of the escape plan. She was the obstacle. Juliana admitted to ending Joseph's life, but insisted the entire event had been scripted by Brendan, that he knew how to control her, that he knew her vulnerabilities, that after the killings he made her wait, help clean, stage the scene, and then call 911. Her deal with prosecutors was clear: plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for full cooperation and testimony at Brendan's trial. Her fate would now depend on how truthfully and completely she brought down the man who started it all. And Brendan? He kept quiet. But silence doesn't protect you when someone else finally starts talking. On September 16th, 2024, nearly 19 months after Christine Banfield bled out in her own bedroom, her husband was finally arrested.
Do you have any personal property? It's in the front seat.
Brendan Banfield, the same man who once stood before police as a grieving husband, was now facing charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and firearm use in a felony. Prosecutors said he'd manipulated the scene, the witnesses, and the woman who once cared for his child, all to eliminate the wife he no longer wanted. Juliana's sentencing was postponed until after Brendan's trial. The prosecution made it clear her future would depend entirely on how well she helped them secure his conviction. Meanwhile, Joseph Ryan, the man lured into a deadly lie, became the tragedy no one could clean up. His mother never gave interviews, but in a quiet post on social media after Brendan's arrest, she wrote, "Living without my only son is unbearable. Justice is the only thing keeping me breathing." Christine's family remained private. Her burial took place in New York, far from the courtroom, far from the staged crime scene, far from the headlines. Her daughter, now 6, is reportedly in the care of close relatives. The courts have sealed her name. Her trauma, however, remains. The Banfields' once idyllic home was never a home again. Neighbors said it felt tainted. The warmth was gone. The American dream that Christine tried to build had been gutted from the inside out, not by strangers or random violence, but by a man she trusted and a woman she welcomed. And maybe that's the part that cuts the deepest. Christine didn't die at the hands of a monster in the dark. She died at the hands of someone who held her child, who slept beside her, who knew the sound of her laugh and the schedule of her day. She never saw it coming. As of May 2025, the Herndon double homicide case continues to unfold. Brendan Banfield was initially scheduled to stand trial in February 2025. However, his trial has now been rescheduled to begin on October 20th, 2025, and is expected to last 4 weeks. He faces multiple charges, including aggravated murder, firearm use during a felony, and felony child abuse. Meanwhile, for Juliana Perez Magalhaes, her sentencing has been postponed to December 19th, 2025, ensuring she remains available to testify against Banfield. Prosecutors have recommended a sentence of time served, contingent on her full cooperation during the upcoming trial. The world will be watching, not just to see whether justice is served, but to understand how a love story collapsed into a crime scene, and how two people could script a fantasy so violent they forgot it would end in real blood. Because when betrayal lives in your own home, the scream doesn't come from outside. It comes from upstairs,